Hey guys, welcome to Did You Get That on Film? On this podcast, we deep dive into horror movies, and so it is full of explicit content as well as spoilers. Please be advised. Now, let's get to the show.
This is Did You Get That on Film, where we discuss characters in terrible situations that we will never find ourselves in. I am your host, DP, and with me always is my co-host, someone who, although is not a fan of children, would know to remove a child from a bed that is moving without any type of help. My girl, Ruth. What's up,
Hello,
Ruth? How are you
everyone.
doing?
Very good.
She was like, not my whole house.
I know, it's a huge house too. With that being said, in case you don't know, today we are talking about The Exorcist. So The Exorcist was released on December 26th, 1973.
50 years of Pazuzu.
50 years. It was directed by William Friedkin, and it's based on the 1971 novel by William Peter Blatty. It has 2 sequels, 2 prequels, a TV show, and a requel that is actually the first movie in the David Gordon Green Blumhouse trilogy that actually just started. The movie just came out in October 2023?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, it's been a long year.
This is what people say. It's like the scariest movie. Isn't that the tagline? Scariest movie of all time.
I think something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, because when it came out, it was remember it came out in 73, so we do have to keep that in mind. Demonic possession movies have come obviously a very long way since this time, but at the time when this movie came out in theaters, people were fainting, throwing up, running screaming from the movie theater. I mean, it was like a really big deal at the time. So yes, it is. I think at the time they were like the scariest movie ever made.
When was the first time you saw this movie?
Oh man. I think I was, oh God, I don't really remember. I was very young though, because we, as we've said before, we grew up in a household that didn't didn't restrict, um, didn't shield
Horror.
us from the horrors, of R-rated movies. But yeah, I saw it very young, and I thought it was very scary. But I really like, I guess this is kind of the start of that. I really like demonic possession stuff. So I really like this movie. Just any demonic possession movie. I'm just like really into that. And the books and stuff. I do think that as a premise, it can be very scary. Some are more well done than others, but yeah, it's been a long time since I'd seen it, and then we watched it for this. When was the first time you saw this movie?
When you told me I needed to watch it for this episode.
Okay.
Which is crazy because my favorite horror movie is Exorcist 3.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd never seen the original one. I think part of it was one, you couldn't catch that in the $5 bin at Walmart.
No, this is never on sale. It's hardly ever streaming.
So because I could never find it on DVD, I just never watched it. And I never thought to myself like, oh, I need to watch the first one,
Mm-hmm.
But I love the third one. I don't know if demonic possessions is scary because I've seen quite a few in the last few years. The Pope's Exorcist, Pray for the Devil, The Boogeyman. Was that Exorcist? Is that demonic possession? Yeah. So I'm just like, I don't know if I find them all like very, very, very scary, but seeing this one as like the the origin, the beginning of that time, I saw it more as a like, this was probably very shocking in 73.
No, I definitely understand what you're saying. I saw a lot of those movies when I was very young. I started watching horror movies pretty young. So in that regard, I do have an appreciation for older movies. I don't need a lot of gore to find something scary. I also appreciate a lot of practical effects. And so when I watch this movie, I try to watch movies like this in the mind frame of like it is a 70s movie. At the time, this was pushing boundaries. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things where you just have to watch it through that lens, like that frame of reference. Like, okay, this is old. You just kind of have to appreciate it for what it is. In preparation for this recording, I actually, not to sound like an overachiever, but I actually went back and I reread the book just because there were things that were, I guess, just kind of missing from the story. I saw a lot of people debating on Reddit, like who even um, was possessing Reagan, which I thought was like very weird. But when I realized how much the movie kind of took out, it's not that clear in the book either, but they do. It is a lot more clear. They never say the demon's name in this
No,
movie. I
no.
just thought that was so crazy.
We just know it's Pazuma. Pat
Pazuzu.
Pazuzu. Pazuma. Pazuzu.
I don't know him, but we know that this was Pazuzu. So I was just like, I guess you would know that if you watch like the sequels, but I thought that was so crazy. Like of all the things that they took out of the movie, I thought it was very weird that you would want to put that in there. But people were saying that they were like, "Oh, Reagan is possessed by the devil," and I was like, "No, she's not." And I hate getting into debates with people on Reddit, but I was just like,
Because that's embarrassing.
right. I don't like doing that. So I was like, oh, well, let me just comment and just tell people that because I was reading the book and I don't know what made me like look it up on Reddit because I guess I was just like, am I tripping or did they really not say the demon's name in this movie? So I looked it up and that's where I saw people like discussing, I guess just confused because I think if you just only saw the movie, you might be like, I don't know what's going on here. So I was like, well, let me go back and read the book because it's not really a long book. The movie is actually almost like a scene for scene of the book. It's just very few details are like left out, just some context. So I went back and read it and I took some notes. So while we're doing this, at some points I'm gonna just like interject a couple of things because I just think it makes the story a little bit more clear. The movie opens up and they're in northern Iraq and we see this group of men. They're on this archaeological dig, and so they're in these ancient ruins. And we see this young man, and he is running to tell this priest, who we later learn is Father Lancaster Marin, that they found something while out digging. What they present to him, so they're looking through these artifacts, they uncover one, this small pendant that I think is a St. Joseph's pendant, as well as this small stone amulet. It's the head of this beastly looking creature. And they don't explicitly say it in the movie, but they do say it in the book. It's the last thing that he finds during this dig. It's the green stone head of the demon Pazuzu. And Pazuzu is the personification of the southwest wind. His dominion is over sickness and disease. This is the demon that he finds. And so I don't think they quite say it in the movie. I think they do say that Father Lancaster Marin later when he's called, they say that he has experience with exorcisms. They make it more clear, I think maybe in the a prequel of this movie, but Father Lancaster Marin has actually fought Pazuzu before. So when he finds this amulet, he's looking at Pazuzu's head. He has a premonition at this dig. And so he knew that yet another fight with Pazuzu is coming for him. And that fight with Pazuzu, he was able to successfully complete that exorcism, but he almost died doing it. So that's why you can tell that something about this little amulet, this stone head that he found, is really affecting him. And this is why. But we cut to a small cafe, and the priest is really going through it. He does not look well, and we see him taking some pills. These are nitroglycerin pills, which we'll kind of learn later, but this priest has kind of a bad heart, and he's very shaken. And so we learn that he is about to leave Iraq. He is done with this dig, but before he goes, he travels to some ruins where he sees this large statue of Pazuzu, and that's where we see Pazuzu in its full form. And that statue comes up later in the movie as well. And that was the prologue of the book and of the movie. So that was kind of acting as like the cold opening. Then we cut to Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and we meet this actress, Chris McNeil. She actually is from LA. She lives in LA full time, but she's renting a house in Georgetown while she's there shooting a movie. And when the movie opens, we see her in a bed and she's preparing for a role, going over her script, when she starts to hear these strange noises. And she goes to investigate, but she can't figure out the source of these noises. So she just kind of assumes that there must be rats in her attic, but it's kind of these faint kind of banging noises. So while she's searching around, she goes in to her daughter's room, and this is when we get our first look at her sleeping daughter, Reagan. So the next morning, Chris sends one of her servants to get... I'm sorry. I don't want to call them servants. What are they?
One of the housekeepers.
Right. Yeah, so to the housekeeper. I'm sorry. That was... I don't know.
So Chris got a plantation over
Stop, baby,
there.
because I told myself when I wrote my notes, I was like, don't call them servants. Don't call them servants. So she sends one of her housekeepers, hired help, to get some rat traps. Now, he is insistent that they do not have rats. And she's like, bitch, what did I say? She's like, don't argue with me. And this is why I kept calling them servants, because the way she treats them is kind of crazy. And so now we're cutting to Chris, and she is at work. She is starring in a film, and it is directed by famed director and her friend, Burke Dennings. They're filming at the Georgetown College campus, and this is where we also get our first glimpse of Father Damien Karras. And he is a priest and a psychiatric counselor who actually counsels the other priests in this Georgetown area. While walking home from the movie set, Chris is intrigued because she kind of overhears Father Karras counseling another priest. In the book, so they kind of talk Father Karras up in the book. This is not shade, so don't take it that way. But Father Karras is supposed to be attractive. I'm not saying that this gentleman is not attractive, but he's supposed to be... She's supposed to be like somewhat attracted to him, and even her friend Sharon is supposed to be like attracted to him. Like, he's... In this instance, every time she like looks at him, I'm like, am I missing something? And that's no shade. I know it sounds like shade, but it's not. But they were actually... One person that was actually in the talks of playing Father Karras was actually Marlon Brando, a young Marlon Brando, and that I feel like would have been...
That's right up your alley.
It is right up my alley. But yes, so I just feel like not that this Father Karras is like an ugly man or anything, but in the book, I guess he is. They do kind of make him just seem like a little bit more irresistible, kind of.
I just think feel like they hired every other man in the movie is old.
I think that the director too was like, well, we can't get Marlon Brando because if we get Marlon Brando, then this is just going to be like, everybody's going to be like, oh, did you see the new Brando movie? And not, did you see The Exorcist? So he was like, we can't have big name actors. Speaking of big names, do you know who was rumored to have been in the runnings to be Reagan, but her mom wouldn't let her?
Oh wait, okay, it's 1973. Her mom wouldn't let her. Does she have a famous parent?
She does have a famous parent.
Is it Jodie Foster?
Ooh, close. Jamie Lee Curtis.
Ah,
Yeah, her mom wouldn't let her because when the book was released, it was kind of a huge deal. There's certain scenes that they do a very good job in the movie of showing, but obviously there's certain scenes that I think a young woman's mother might not want her to do on camera.
like
Um,
Sleepaway Camp.
exactly. So yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis's mom was like, I don't think so. But when the director, when Linda Blair came in to audition, I mean, I think she just like blew him away because one of the things is that she knew what masturbation was, and she was very comfortable like talking about it. So he was like, oh fuck yeah, this girl's gonna be great because it gets crazy, right? Reagan gets in some pretty crazy situations throughout the movie.
I'm glad she didn't get that movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
this wasn't fun. Like this was like this Linda
I
Blair
agree.
movie. You know,
I agree. So when Chris gets home, we finally meet Reagan, as well as Chris's friend slash secretary slash Reagan's tutor, Sharon Spencer. It's just important to remember that Reagan and Chris do not live here. This is not their permanent residence. They're just renting this house in Georgetown. I think they've been here just like, I don't know, just like a matter like 6 weeks or something. But she doesn't have any friends in this area. She doesn't have any friends. She does not attend a regular school because of this, she's new to the area. They're only here very temporarily. Additionally, she's an actress's daughter. She's very isolated, and that becomes important. So outside of spending time with Sharon and Chris, Reagan spends the majority of her time alone. We get some heartwarming scenes with Reagan and Chris. And Reagan seems like a very sweet little girl. She seems very well adjusted. She's funny, charming. Then we cut back to Father Karras. Now, the movie does this a lot because they're essentially jumping between these two stories, the McNeil family and Father Karras, and then they're going to meet at some point in the middle. So Father Karras is on his way to New York via subway to go visit his ailing mother. While walking through the subway station, Father Karras encounters this unhoused man who says to him, Father, could you help an old altar boy? I'm a Catholic. Father Karras he kind of acts like disgusted by him and he walks away. But in the book, I didn't like that they did this in the movie because Father Karras through the book, he is a very nice man. He's a really good guy. In the book, the interaction with this like unhoused man, it's a lot longer, and he does in fact help him. He gives him money even though he is disgusted by him, but that's just like something he's thinking internally. But Father Karras is a helping person. That is a part of his nature, which will come up later because he's going to help the McNeils. But it's important to remember that phrase, Father, could you help an altar boy? I'm a Catholic. So at his mother's house, his mom greets him and she keeps calling him by his nickname, Dimmy. And he cares for her by wrapping her leg because she's suffering from edema, some fluid trapped in the legs. And he really tries to implore her to leave her apartment and let him take her somewhere where she can be cared for with other people around, but she refuses. She does not want to leave her apartment, which is very typical of an older person. They don't want to change, and I wouldn't either. After he's done caring for her, she's sleeping, and he turns on the radio and he leaves her and he heads home. So now we cut back to Chris and Reagan. And while hanging out in the basement / game room, Chris finds a Ouija board and she asks Reagan if they can play it together. And I was
See,
like, damn, that's kind of crazy.
this is where it starts because we live in like, ooh, that's not ours.
That's the thing. I was like, man, you hardly ever see in the movies where a parent finds a Ouija board and they're like, oh, fuck yeah, let's do this together. Usually it's a bad sign, right? When you find a Ouija, I was like, maybe that was only after this movie came out. Maybe prior to that, people were like, oh, it's harmless.
I think there's some things that come up when you're just like, oh, this movie sets that trope. Because as soon as I say Ouija board, I was like, oh no. Like, oh no.
Right. But I think you're like that because of this. Like,
Right.
this started the whole Ouija board, be afraid of it thing.
She's like she had an Airbnb and they had games.
Yeah,
Ooh,
she's
look,
like,
yeah.
ooh, look at this. You want to
They
play?
got they got taboo.
That's how Chris is about this fucking Ouija board. She's super fucking excited. And Reagan reveals, she's like, yeah, I play with that thing all the time. And I'm like, Chris, this is a red flag. Because Chris sits down to play with her, and Reagan's like, I play by myself all the time, which is bizarre. Chris is like, I don't think you can play it alone. And Reagan's like, bitch, what did I say? She's like, I'm alone for 16 hours a day. She's like, I know how to play a Ouija board. So when Chris goes to join Reagan, she puts her hands on the planchette and it literally shoots across the board by itself. Like it ejects away from Chris. And Chris's response is like, oh, haha, you really don't want to play with me, huh? And I was like, Chris, you should be alarmed. It clearly was not Reagan pulling this thing. I was like, I'm alarmed.
She's not a bad parent, but my God, Chris. This is just the start.
Right.
This is just the start because
Right. Yeah, that does have to be said. What we learn is that Reagan's parents are divorced. So she lives with Chris, she travels with Chris. Her father is so far not in the picture. Like, he's in Europe. He's fucked off. Like, he won't even talk to Reagan on her birthday. Like, he just is not involved in her life whatsoever.
that's wow.
It's wild. I was like, damn. And Reagan seems like such a sweet kid, but they harp on this a lot in the book. Chris feels like she's very scared that Reagan is suppressing some anger, sadness, resentment about her divorce. And she thinks that because when they're playing on this Ouija board, Chris is like, oh, you don't want me to play with you, huh? And Reagan responds, oh, it's not me. It's Captain Howdy that doesn't want you to play. And so Chris is like, well, who the hell is Captain Howdy? And Reagan replies that, she's like, well, I ask the questions and Captain Howdy is the one that answers. These are red flags, Chris. But Chris just agrees. She accepts this answer. She's like, oh, yeah, I get it. That's alarming. But
I'm a cool mom.
yeah, right. But in the book, I'm not sure if they say it in the movie, Reagan's father's name is Howard. And so I guess Chris doesn't push back on the issue because she's like, well, this must be some sort of like daddy issue thing, right? So Captain Howdy, Howard, like she must just be kind of longing for some kind of father figure companionship type thing. So maybe that's why Chris is not immediately like, hey, maybe we should go talk about this.
Typical actress. She's like, I want her to have problems so that she can channel it
I
into her
know.
art. It's just like, come on.
She's like, yes, I can smell that Academy Award right now. So yeah, Chris is this single mom and Howard's out of the picture and Reagan has daddy issues. And so it's, it's a little alarming, but Chris is like, well, I'll just like kind of let it slide. But we get some more heartwarming conversation between Chris and Reagan before Chris puts Reagan to bed. So we learn that it's almost Reagan's birthday, and I think this is going to be Reagan's 12th birthday. So she's 11, just about to turn 12. Chris is telling Reagan that she's going to take her to the movies for her birthday, which is in a couple of days, and they can have a nice day of sightseeing because Reagan doesn't really do much while her mom's working. And Reagan seems really thrilled at the idea. And it's a very touching scene of them exchanging I love yous and things like that. And this is like, so Reagan's father is briefly mentioned at this point, but we never see him. We never see him. We don't hear his voice. And so Reagan suggests that her mom is with Burke Dennings, her director, because she says something like, well, Mr. Dennings can come too. And Chris is like, what do you mean? And so
She's like, come on.
I know, right? She's like, Mom, I'm
Mom,
11, not 9. I know what grown-ups do.
I know
But
what masturbation is.
right. She's like, how do you think I got this role? But Chris is like, me and Burke don't have any kind of relationship, and they really don't. They truly don't. Because as we'll learn, Burke Dennings is kind of really fucking annoying. He's a lot to handle. And she legitimately doesn't have a relationship with him, but I guess Reagan's like, well, you spend so much time with him. Like, you can't always be working, right? But, Chris kind of shuts that down, but it kind of, I guess it's in Reagan's mind that they do have some sort of like relationship. And I think she asks him, like, I think Chris is like, oh, he's my friend. And Reagan's like, well, do you love him like you love daddy? So it's kind of clear where like her head is at. But Reagan dismisses that. And a couple of days later, Reagan's birthday comes. And there's this scene with Chris blowing up. She is losing it. And this is some real single mom who works 2 jobs behavior, because she is pissed because Reagan's father promised that he was going to call on her birthday to wish her a happy birthday. And he not only does he not call, but he refuses to answer the phone. He's like they're trying to call a hotel in Rome where he's staying, and just the entire day. I mean, Reagan was so far off of his mind. I mean, she might as well not exist.
She doesn't exist to him.
She doesn't exist. And so you can tell, like, Reagan looks a little defeated. She kind of, this hurts her feelings. And then we hear, and Chris is she's really loud. And so it's like Reagan can also hear that all of this is happening. She is venting to Sharon that Reagan's dad just like does not give a shit. I guess she doesn't realize that Reagan is listening outside of the room, but she is. And so that was kind of sad.
It's a lot of setting up of like their relationship, Chris and Reagan, and then also Reagan being isolated.
Not having that father figure.
Yeah, and also just like not having anyone. Because even though
Right.
like her and Chris have a good relationship, like Chris is on set
A lot.
a lot.
She doesn't have as much time as she probably.
Wants to.
So we then get the scene of Father Karras, who is at a bar with another priest. So this is Tom, and he's asking for reassignment. Not just because his mother is sick and he wants to be close with her, because that is one reason, but because he just feels like he can no longer adequately do his job. He thinks he can't cut it anymore. And he's like, it's more than just my position as a psychiatrist, but also as a priest. Because Father Karras reveals that he has lost his faith, that he can no longer listen to other priests talk through these issues because he doesn't have it in him to reassure them that, God's got their back. Because he's like, I don't believe in it anymore. So Tom's like, yeah, we'll like look into it. We'll try to figure this out. So in the wee hours of the morning after Reagan's birthday, Chris is awoken to go to work. I think it's like very, very early. I think it's still kind of dark outside. And she finds Reagan in her bed. And when she asks Reagan why she's in her bed, Reagan tells her, my bed was shaking and I haven't been able to get any sleep. Dante, that's a red flag. Chris is just like, oh, okay, bye.
Can you at least go check the bed?
Just be like, or just ask some follow-up questions. Just be like, what do you mean shaking? How long has this been going on? What's happening? She, like, the first thing she does when she rolls over, she's like, hey, why the fuck are you in here? And so she's like, okay, well, I gotta go. So as she's getting up, she starts to hear those same strange noises from earlier, those little banging noises coming from the attic. And so she's like, I know I told this bitch to go get rat traps. So she goes up to investigate. It's pitch dark. She brings a candle. Chris, while she's walking around, she does see all the traps that her housekeeper Carl put down. So he did do it. But she does not see any signs of rats.
Because it don't even sound like rats.
It doesn't, Dante, when I say that it's like knock, rats don't knock. I'm just like, I don't understand what she was thinking. She was just grasping at straws. He pops up. He couldn't wait. He's been salivating to show her, like, see, bitch, I told you. We don't have any goddamn rats. The attic is very clean. It's like spotless, besides these damn rats. So the noise does stop in this moment, though. But there's this strange moment where the candle that she's holding, the flame, like, explodes in her face. That was super weird because she just kind of doesn't care. She's just like, oh, well, candles do that. And she just leaves. I just thought that was really crazy.
I think we talked about this before. Are we just scary?
No,
everything
okay,
is us like, nah.
I know that it does seem that way. I know it does. But this, okay, first, I do have to concede. It's 73. Movies like this hadn't come out yet. They hadn't had movies like Ouija or whatever. So, I guess this movie is kind of setting up all these things. I guess in the 70s, even with like Halloween, remember they were like, things are just so innocent. People don't even lock their doors. And now this guy comes and it kind of changes the whole landscape of things. I do have to concede that. But
Okay.
if your child tells you, my bed has been shaking all night, I couldn't sleep, I don't think I need to live in the 2000s to be like, oh my God, can you tell me more about this? I'm concerned. I don't know. It was shaking enough. And then she's 12. She's not like 6. You know what I mean? Like, she's old enough to not be like fibbing.
Chris did everything. She wanted to probably hand her a rat trap. Girl, go put something in your bed.
It's probably just the rats. I told Carl to get traps.
That Carl, what are we gonna do with him? It's sweltering.
I know.
It's sweltering.
Carl couldn't wait to be like, you stupid bitch. There's no fucking rats. So now how do you explain the noise? How do you explain it? She just kind of lets it go.
What's like Master Splinter must be up there. So like, what kind of
Master Splinter doing like a construction project?
So this is where I guess we're not to that part yet, because I was watching and I was just like, see, if she would just left here, that's how your daughter got possessed. Every time she made a sound, I was like, see, that's how your daughter got possessed.
I know. In her defense, I think that Reagan by this point is already possessed.
Do you think she got possessed as soon as she got there? Like as soon as she got to the house?
That's the thing. I don't know, because this movie, I did make a note of this, does a horrible job with giving you any sense of time. Because it kind of feels like at certain points that it's only been just like a couple of days, right? Like you're like, oh, well, it's been just like kind of like a week or something. Like all this is taking place over like a week, but that's not true. it's taking place over a long period of time.
Yeah, because Reagan racked up some hospital bills.
Dante, I was like, damn, Christmas had that fire health insurance.
No, she got that fire money. They was like, she ain't got no copay. She paid out of pocket.
Out of pocket. I know, they were like, well, it was clean, but maybe we could do just one more.
But I was thinking, you remember when we did our Hell House episode? Y'all listen to that if y'all didn't hear that. But you remember when we were like, when did old boy get possessed? And we was like, when did he get possessed? So I had to watch the first part a few times. But I was like, when am I missing? I didn't know when she got possessed.
That's the thing. So I think when the movie started,
She possessed.
she's already possessed. It's just slow. It just takes time for it to escalate. But I think that I think from the moment she started talking to Captain Howdy, which she apparently had been doing for a while, I think when those noises that she's hearing are already instances of the possession.
So you think like the Ouija board was like her like inviting the demon in?
Yes. Yeah, I think that under no uncertain terms, the Ouija board is what led to the possession. The movie, it happens pretty quickly. Like once she is possessed, it really it goes downhill like fairly quickly. The book, it feels like it takes time.
It's like we gotta save this little girl
Right. Yeah.
or die trying.
Right. Literally. Like they're like the 50 cents of the Catholic Church.
All I heard was the. I don't know what you heard about me, but a bitch can't get that demon out of me.
I love, that's from the unofficial soundtrack. So we then cut to a scene at the Georgetown Chapel, and they discovered this statue of Mary, and it's been desecrated. The way that it looks is super, super bizarre. There's these really pointy boobs and this really pointy penis glued onto her, as well as a lot of red paint that looks like blood all over her breasts, fake penis, palms. It's just like dripping off of her. It's really crazy. This is in the movie the only instance of desecration that you see. In the book, there's a lot of instances of desecration. There's a statue of Jesus that's desecrated. They don't put that in the movie, probably, like for obvious reasons. There's also this like statue of Mary that's desecrated. One thing that I kind of wish they would have put in the movie, because they find this prayer card, and inside the laminated prayer card it's written out in completely perfect, in every way, Latin, and it's the story of like a lesbian encounter between Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary, and it in itself is a desecration of the holy text. They don't do a very good job in the movie, but they do make it pretty clear in the book that the person that is committing these desecrations is Reagan, which is very crazy to think about, right?
Right.
And it starts pretty early, so that's another indication that Reagan is very much possessed by this point. And it also, the book, which they do in the movie too, although in the movie at a certain point everybody is just kind of on board with the fact that she is possessed. In the book, it takes a mind-boggling amount of time for anybody to acknowledge that this girl is in fact possessed and not sick. But one thing that points to her being possessed is she shouldn't know how to speak
Speak
Latin,
Latin.
write Latin. Right. It's written perfectly. Like they make it a point. And then the Detective Kinderman in the book, when all these desecrations are happening, he takes that card. Father Karras is one of the people that finds it. or it's given to Father Karras. He takes that car from Father Karras and they run it for fingerprints. And the only fingerprints that are on it are Father Karras's and fingerprints that belong to a child. And so they make it clear. I think maybe he has something of Reagan to compare, but they make it very clear that Reagan is the person that is committing these desecrations. So at some point, I guess in the middle of the night, or when nobody's noticing, Reagan is sneaking out and putting fake penises on the Virgin Mary. So we then cut to a hospital where Father Karras's mother has been admitted. This is a psychiatric facility. It's a Bellevue. And we learn from her brother, Father Karras's uncle, that she suffered a cerebral edema, or it's a swelling in her brain, and it has caused these psychological side effects. So that's why she was brought to the psychiatric hospital. She was ranting and raving, very confused. And so her brother is kind of like low-key a piece of shit for bringing her here instead of an actual hospital. But he just keeps harping on the fact that they're poor, and Damien's not a doctor. He's only a priest, so he can't afford to bring her to like a nice hospital. But she is strapped to the bed and she's distraught. And she is asking her son, how could you do this to me, Demi? Like, why would you leave me here? What the hell did I do to deserve this? And Father Karras is distraught over this. They don't show it in the movie. I don't really know why they even put this scene in the movie. I think that they only put the scene of her in the hospital to get that dialogue of her saying, why you do this to me, Demi? You know, I think they just wanted you to hear that. But at some point, because the movie does not do a good job of keeping track of like time, it's not linear, but we learn later from Father Karras's friend and colleague, Father Dyer, that his mom actually ends up dying. So apparently she went back home after she was checked out of this hospital, and while she was in her apartment alone, she died. And it was actually some time before she was found by like the superintendent or something. It had been days. And Father Karras feels extremely guilty about this because he wasn't there. And so then he starts to be plagued by nightmares of his mother. Father Dyer ends up telling Chris McNeil about Father Karras's mother, as well as his role as a psychiatric counselor in the church, while he's at a big party that she is hosting at her house. After their conversation, Father Dyer jumps on the piano because he's just fun. He's a good time. He's a great guy to have at a party. I'm kind of glad that she didn't invite Father Karras because he's a real downer. We love Father Dyer, though. In the book, there is another guest at the party that they cut out of the movie, and I kind of wish that they hadn't, but there's a woman, her name is Mrs. Perrin. She's a psychic medium. So she's at the party, and Reagan comes down when she's normal to kind of make the rounds, like kind of socializing at the party. She goes up and she talks to everybody, and she's pretty fine, except when she gets to Mrs. Perrin, she totally ignores her. She doesn't want to look at her. She doesn't want to acknowledge her. So Mrs. Perrin feels weird about Reagan. She is a psychic medium. She can kind of sense that something is off about her. So she ends up reaching out and touching Reagan, and Reagan pulls away from her. But right, because that is weird, right? To have a stranger grab you and touch you at a party.
It was the 70s, and it was Hollywood.
So that was not unusual at all
She
for
was a
adults
child.
to be touching a child at a Hollywood party, right? Oh, that's awful. So she reached out and touches her, but it only takes that short amount of physical contact for Mrs. Perrin to know that something is very, very wrong with Reagan, and they make it pretty clear that Mrs. Perrin knows that Reagan is possessed. she doesn't tell Chris this, but she's immediately disturbed after she touches her. When Chris was telling Mrs. Perrin about all the behavior that Chris had attributed to Reagan just like trying to get attention, because up until this point, Chris just believes that Reagan's behavior has just been like attention seeking because she like misses her dad or something. Mrs. Perrin looks very troubled because she knows these signs. These are not attention seeking behavior. These are signs of a possession. And I can't remember what book or whatever I read it in. I think I just read a possession book. One of the first signs of possession is noises, tapping kind of sounds that come from nowhere. So these sounds are happening. That's another like indication that she's possessed. So Mrs. Perrin is aware of that. When Chris asks if it was okay if Reagan played with her Ouija board, because Chris is like, she doesn't really believe in that kind of stuff. And she tells Ms. Perrin how she talks to Captain Howdy and all that kind of stuff. And she's asking, but she's expecting Mrs. Perrin to kind of laugh it off. The psychic, Mrs. Perrin is like, I would take that away from her, you dumb bitch.
See, this every time Chris talks to somebody, I'm always like, Chris might have no sense.
But the person that she's talking to is also like, Chris has no sense.
Right.
Because they're just sitting there listening to her like,
But even Chris's living housekeeper, Tula, whatever, is like, this is weird. This is not normal. Nothing that was happening is normal.
That's so funny you say that, because at the end, Sharon does leave. She's like, are you sure you don't want to come with us, Sharon? Sharon's like, no, thank you though, no. So Chris is expecting Mrs. Perrin to be like, no, it's fine. That's just all fake hooey. But Mrs. Perrin like, nah, I'd take that shit from her immediately. She wants to be like, bitch, I hate that you even let her play with it in the first place, you dumb hoe. But she doesn't. She's
and then invited us to this party.
With this girl here. She's very tactful about it. She's like, no, I'd probably take it. And she has a few more ominous words before she's like, I'm gonna dip. But thank you for inviting me. She's like, let's get the fuck out of here, because she just knows. And so later, she ends up sending Chris a book. She doesn't deliver it herself because she's like, I'm never going back to that house again. But she ends up sending Chris a book on kind of like the occult and stuff, witchcraft, things like possession, because that's in there too, because she knows. There's also, they don't make it clear in the movie, but there is, because Chris is very popular. I mean, she's famous, so everybody wants to be at her party. So she has a psychic medium. There's like a councilman there. She has a priest and an astronaut who is scheduled to take a flight to the moon within the year. While they're all singing and partying with Dyer on the piano, they're all drunk, happy, having a good time. Reagan appears in the room, and everybody stops to look at her. She's in her nightgown, looking crazy. And she turns to the astronaut, and I wish that they made it a little more clear in the movie who he is, because you kind of don't know what she's talking about. But she just looks at him and just blank, monotone voice. She's like, you're going to die up there. And then she immediately starts to just piss all over the floor, just peeing.
She had an accident.
She had an accident. And everybody's like, ooh, this is awkward. And Chris goes up. She goes up to Reagan and she's like, oh my God. And she turns, she tells everybody, she's like, she's been really sick. She takes her upstairs for a bath, like a good mom. In the bathtub, it's a really sweet, sad moment. When she's in the bathtub, Reagan questions Chris. She's like, why is this happening to me? Like, what the hell is going on? And Chris assures her that it's just her nerves.
Again, just like a person who has no sense of anything. Just no sense. What does that even mean?
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that's supposed
It's
to
just your
mean.
nerves. I was like, like, what are you talking about? You was
What
like
are we
peed on the
talking about right
floor.
now?
You was that nervous?
I don't know. You climbed out of your bed, walked all the way down here to piss on the floor in front of a psychic, an astronaut, and a priest. Sounds like a bad joke.
It is a bad joke. But even she's saying like something's wrong with me. You know, like
She
she's
she, she can
it's like
feel
she's just
it,
like whatever. She's like something's wrong with me. And from here,
right?
you guys, it only gets crazy. This is about to be the crazy. It's about to go so fast and so crazy.
It
Now I think
escalates
about it.
very. It escalates from here. Obviously, it's already escalating. So she puts Reagan to bed, and almost as soon as Chris leaves the room, she hears Reagan screaming, and she runs back in the room to find Reagan hysterical on her bed, and the bed is like violently shaking. I mean, coming up off the floor, shaking. It's like a mechanical bull. Like it's
Yes.
crazy the way this bed is moving. And she's begging her mom to make it stop. And then Chris ends up taking her to the hospital. And in my mind, I'm like, Chris, the bed wasn't moving because Reagan is having the Moody Mondays.
This point, I was like, okay, so Chris is like dumb. Okay, got it.
Chris,
And
but Chris ends up jumping on the bed. It's still moving while Chris is on the bed too.
Chris is like, man, these rats are out of control.
She's like, where are the traps?
But I'm trying to understand. This was the part where I was like, okay, so is this kind of like of the time you don't know what's going on, so you immediately try to get like medical attention? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so it feels like this happens in every possession thing, right? I was like, it's a good thing I don't have children because they could do anything and I'd be like, oh my God, she's possessed. You'd have me in hysterics. You'd be like, girl, I think she might be possessed. I would always think she's possessed. That'd be my first instinct. I guess as maybe Chris is just a more level headed person than you or I because Chris is trying to seek medical advice first. She goes to the doctors and
For a bed? Is one.
well, I would have been like, one, Reagan, like you could sleep in my room. That would have been my go-to.
But we already
If
established that Reagan is not allowed there.
no, because she woke up, she's like, bitch, what the fuck are you doing in here? Or just let her sleep in like a guest room. Let her sleep. Like tell your fucking manservant to give up his room.
It's a rental. All the rooms are guest rooms. Like,
All the rooms are guest rooms. Let her sleep on the sofa. So Chris ends up taking Reagan to the hospital to be checked out because Reagan's personality is changing. She's developing a very foul mouth and she's become violent. And because her bed shakes uncontrollably. I don't know. But at the hospital, she spits in the doctor's face and she calls him a fucking bastard. And it's so funny because Burke Dennings has a little bit of a bigger presence in the book. Dennings has a very foul mouth. And he is kind of around Reagan a lot. So Dennings has a habit of using the word cunt.
he has a filthy mouth.
Dennings uses the word cunt like a noun, verb, adjective. Like he uses it crazy. Like he's like, you're a cunt, this cunting juice. But he also, they do make it clear in the book too, he also has a drinking problem. He's a horrible person when he's drunk and he drinks a lot. They show him drinking at the party and he ends up getting into a fight with Chris's housekeeper, Carl. And she has to like, put him in a cab and send him home early. And it's just a lot. But Dennings does have a really foul mouth. And in the movie, she spits in the doctor's face and she calls him a fucking bastard and stuff, which is like really, and I know that I curse a lot and I know that I put words in people's mouths a lot, but she really did call him a fucking bastard. Like I didn't make that up. in the book she says stuff, like the doctor is done examining her and he goes to Chris and he's like, does Reagan curse? And Chris is like, absolutely not, like she wouldn't even dream of it. She's like, why do you ask? And he's like, because she told me to keep my fucking fingers away from her cut or something. And I was like, damn. I was like, that's crazy. Chris is like shocked by that, but she also kind of has the idea that maybe she's getting some of this like foul language from Burke Dennings, because Dennings says cunt so much. I guess she's like, how else could she possibly know that word? He says it a lot. But the doctor believes that all of Reagan's issues, including her drastic change in personality, he's like, they're all being caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, which is being prompted by a lesion in her temporal lobe.
Paying out of pocket, we about to create some stuff.
Right.
We have to play Mad Libs.
There's so many times in the movie where it feels like that. There, at a certain point, even Chris is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because
he's playing Mad Libs. He literally got
lot.
like, okay, let me just plug in some stuff.
Right. He's like, what is it? What's really serious? The brain. Where can it be? I don't know. The frontal lobe. I don't know. So he's just like,
what sounds scary? Legions.
Dude, he's throwing a lot of stuff out there. And so she's
like, what?
Scared, Well, she asks him in the book, I can't remember in the movie when she brings this up, but in the book, almost immediately, she asks him, like, if she's having these personality changes stuff, she should go to a psychiatrist, right? He's like, wait, I need my annual bonus. Let's run the test here first. He's like, even a psychiatrist will want you to get her checked out physically first. So he's like, let's run some tests. But y'all, this is where it really gets crazy. Chris is like, okay, I get all of that, I guess, but what about the bed shaking? This man tells Chris that
Don't even matter what he
Reagan,
tell her. And she listened. Make sure y'all remember that point. And
yeah,
she
she
listened.
accepts this. He's like, one of Reagan's symptoms is muscle spasms, and this would explain why it felt like her bed was shaking.
All I could think was, even in your most active evening activities, nobody bed moves like that.
No.
Spasms?
No.
What kind of spasms?
I used to wrestle with my cousins in a twin bed. The shit didn't move like that. Okay? It was off the floor. And Chris does say, like, no, the bed was legitimately shaking. I was on it too. And the doctor's just like, look, bitch, who's the doctor here? And Chris is like, okay, I accept it.
I couldn't believe he said that. I couldn't believe she took that. I can't believe that we're going to cut to a new scene and Reagan going to be in the same bed. It's too much, man.
So he tells Chris, he just assures her that if they could just remove this lesion, everything's going to be fine. Trust me, I'm a doctor. So then we cut to a scene, and I thought that this was so crazy. Remember how we were talking about earlier that people were like fainting and throwing up and passing out and stuff? This was the scene that caused people to have those reactions. Like, this was, people think that this was the worst scene in the whole movie. And I was like, I think that's crazy. It was that arteriogram that she gets. So we take her, so Reagan's being taken for this arteriogram, which is a catheter it's inserted into a major artery in the neck. And they're going to use this procedure to take images of her brain. When they go to put it in, they draw some blood out and it shoots out of her neck. And I saw that medical professionals actually praised the scene for how medically accurate it was, but this had people passing out. I was like, damn. Either we're built
Whole
way
generation.
different. Yes, like that's what I'm not trying to be rude, but like, damn, this is what got you? She ends up masturbating with a cross, and this is what had y'all passing out? I was like, this was just a little medical procedure. I was like, damn, that's crazy. But she has this arteriogram. And they're trying to use this. So it's what they used before to diagnose any kind of masses in the brain before they had like CT and MRI. It is a lot of blood, but it's not, I mean, it's not a ton of blood, but surprise, surprise, the tests come back and they find absolutely nothing wrong with Reagan's brain.
This is what you're thinking. Okay, so now Chris is going to get a second opinion. Or Chris is going to be like, you know what? It's obviously not this.
It's
I need,
well, so let's go
y'all,
now to the psychiatrist situation. Like, you think that as a responsible doctor, that because she asked him, should I take her to a psychiatrist? He was like, no, it's a fucking brain lesion. It comes back, there's no brain lesion. He's like, well, ooh, how can I squeeze another grand out of her? We got to run it again. That's my solution. Don't take her yet. We got to keep running those tests. And they do.
and she paid for it.
Right. So the doctors are reviewing her scans, and the two doctors are talking, and it's just like, it's not only do they not find this lesion where they thought they were going to find it, her scan is pristine. It's not like it's fuzzy. It's not like the images didn't come out well or the procedure was like kind of botched. She moved a little. Her brain scan is pristine. But they get an urgent call from Chris while they're looking at this, and it's prompting them to go to the house to perform a house check on Reagan, because Chris is like, get here quick, things are out of control. And they are out of control.
Oh, yeah.
Things are getting very crazy. When the doctors get to the house, they go up to Reagan's room, and I guess they're expecting these quote unquote muscle spasms. No.
Y'all.
Reagan is being violently slammed up and down on her bed, like hinged from the waist, like just up and down, just like a fucking rag doll. The doctors are standing there shook because this shit is crazy. Like, the way that she's moving, I don't even think that you could do it yourself. I don't think that you could physically make yourself
Do that.
like.
It looked like it had to hurt because it was like you have to keep your lower body still and you just down, down, and it's like, and muscle spasms, y'all. Rats and muscle
Yeah,
spasms.
rats. The whole movie is just rats and muscles. That's so 70s. So she then crashes down on the bed and her eyes roll back in her head to reveal just like totally white. And then she gets this fist-sized lump that appears in her throat. And so the doctors are like, damn, I guess we should step in and do something. So the doctor tries to approach her, but Reagan jumps up and she essentially like slaps the taste out of this man's mouth. She backhands the shit out of him. And this is my thing, because I found that, I know these doctors don't know her, but it's pretty obvious to me, and I feel like it should be very obvious to Chris and to Sharon, when Reagan's speaking, this is not her voice, right? She starts talking
In this voice.
It's a voice that's like, it's clearly not her own. It's deeper. And she's also talking about herself in
In
the
the
third
third
person.
person.
She's saying stuff like, keep away, the sow is mine. And then, y'all, this was intense. She ends up kneeling on her bed and she lifts up her nightgown to expose her vagina. And then she starts saying, fuck me, over and over again in this voice that's not hers. And then she goes back to violently thrashing before the doctors are like, okay, well, let's give her a sedative. So they give her this sedative. And then they debrief in the hallway. Chris wants to know, how is any of this possible? Because that's another thing. Sorry, in addition to being thrown up and down like that, she starts being like, her entire body starts getting thrown like up off the bed. Like, she's getting a lot of air. It's not possible. It's a full body leap, just like flat on her back, leaping up off the bed. Chris wants to know, how is this possible? The flying off the bed, the abnormal amount of strength, because she really did. I know that doctor's, in addition to his pride, I know his jaw had to hurt because she slapped the shit out of him. And the doctors are still trying to give it this medical reason. They're still suggesting that it might be a lesion. I was so tired of them. Chris is tired of them too, though.
Not tired enough.
Not tired enough, but she is like, what the fuck are you talking about? She's fed up, but then she's like, I'm sorry. And I was like, Chris, for what? This is ridiculous.
It was the 70s and she was a woman.
I
She needed to
know.
apologize.
I know.
She's speaking to not just a man, a doctor.
Doctors.
A doctor man.
Men doctors.
The only kind of doctors.
The only kind there were. So it's fed up, but she apologizes and she agrees to more tests. Of course, the tests are normal. They were normal the first time. This was a money grab. Chris?
They took your money.
I know. The doctor's like, well, shit, I'm out of ideas at this point. I can't think of any other way to steal this woman's money. I guess now it's time to find a psychiatrist. Let me hook up my friend with a job. I know a guy.
They call it networking.
They do. So when Chris gets back home from the doctor, all the lights are like flickering on and off in the house. And she's like, that's weird. And the house is empty, totally empty, except for Reagan. She goes to check on her, and Reagan is sleeping in her bed. It's a freezing cold room. The window is wide open. Like, you can see her breath. It's so cold in the room. And Reagan is still sleeping because the doctors had to give her that sedative earlier. So she's out. Presumably, she's just been out this entire time. So Chris is kind of irritated because she's like, why is she in here alone with the window wide open? She could get sick. It's freezing. Where the hell is everybody? Just then Sharon gets back and Chris is like, bitch, what am I paying you for? Why did you leave her? And Sharon tells Chris that she didn't actually leave Reagan alone, that when she left to go to the pharmacy, because the pharmacist couldn't deliver the medicine that Reagan needed, because clearly she needs medication to be sedated so this doesn't keep happening to her. She was like, well, Burke Denning stopped by, and I figured that since he was going to be waiting for you anyway, that he could just wait here with Reagan.
He's basically Reagan's new daddy. So,
I know. Well, that's how Reagan feels.
And Pazuzu.
And Pazuzu, right. Pazuzu's like, I'm not an idiot. This is not my first rodeo. So just then, Chris's friend Chuck rings the doorbell. And he's like, have you heard? Burke Dennings is dead. Like, right outside your fucking house. Did you know that? And she is distraught. And she's like, what the hell happened? And he tells her that he must have been drunk and he fell down the stairs right next to her house and broke his neck. Now, next to the McNeil house, they live up on essentially like a hill. And down the back of their property, of this rental, it's like almost kind of like a brownstone type property. But down the back, there's these stairs. I think it's a lot of stairs and they're very steep. I think it's something like 76 stairs. Burke apparently fell down those stairs and died. So next we cut to Reagan, and she's in the living room with the psychiatrist, and I'm like, psychiatrist / hypnotist? Didn't that seem funny?
I mean, look.
That's not science.
Look.
I don't know.
Well, do you think only single moms can work 2 jobs?
Stop. True. Can't knock the hustle.
Shoot.
Well, the psychiatrist / hypnotist. So he hypnotizes Reagan, and while Chris and her doctor look on. So I actually noticed, so the way that Reagan is sitting in that chair, if you remember, which you probably don't, and that I'll forgive you for that, but the statue of Pazuzu in the beginning, so Pazuzu is a actual demonic entity. He is a real thing. There are real statues of this this entity. In all depictions of Pazuzu, he always looks the same way. And it's him, and he's sitting, I think it's like with his right hand pointing upwards, like being held upwards, and his left hand pointing downward. That is how Regan looks sitting in this chair. She is like striking that exact same pose. So as she's under hypnosis, the psychiatrist attempts to talk to whatever the person is that is inside of Regan. She does admit that there is someone inside of her, but she's not really talking. So this scene, I think, was very well done in the book. In the movie, like, not really so much. He actually does talk to Pazuzu a good bit in the book. He doesn't mention he's Pazuzu. He's talking, and they don't find out until much later in the book. They just keep calling it like gibberish, but we learn later that he's talking and it's just backwards, right? When they're talking to Regan, she's one way. She is like herself. And the doctor's like, well, if Regan is hypnotized, that means that the entity inside of her is also hypnotized. So you need to talk to me too. And in that moment, she visibly changes. Her face actually changes in the book. It's harsher. She kind of takes on the look like what she'll kind of look like later in the movie. And her breath stinks really bad. They describe it as putrid. It's like her tongue is like mummified. They can actually see the change in her tongue. It's just a scene that's a lot more fleshed out in the book, and it's much better done. And Pazuzu does talk a lot more, and just essentially he's like, yeah, I'm in the girl and I'm going to stay in her until she's dead, basically.
We really like books.
We do
We're
like
like,
books.
yes, the book is always better. We're always like, yeah, we just really like books.
I know. And I do think they did a really, really good job with the movie. Obviously, I just think that they could have done. I feel like there's stuff that they needed for context that they didn't put. I feel like the movie would have been creepier if they would have put in little things, like add just a little bit more context. In the movie, instead of really talking to the doctor, Regan just starts growling, and she ends up grabbing the psychiatrist by his testicles. And I mean, she's really giving it to him. Like, she is fucking his testicles up. Iron grip, and he's screaming because I know that shit must hurt. And everybody's trying to pry Reagan off of this man's testicles. It's just very crazy. I know he was like mad at that doctor for hooking him up. He's like, you didn't tell me this bitch was really crazy. He's like, I'm just a part-time hypnotist. But we then cut to homicide detective William Kinderman. So this is us meeting him. He is going to meet with Father Karras, and he wants to talk to him about Burke Denning's murder because Kinderman is absolutely sure that Burke was murdered, that this was not an accident. He didn't just fall down the stairs. Now, he knows this because he's like, yeah, he did fall down the stairs, and yeah, technically he did break his neck. But by break his neck, we mean
His head was spun around.
his head was completely spun around. In the book, they describe it like all his, like, as you would imagine with a head that's been completely turned around, all his muscle and tendons and stuff are all torn. And they're like, it would take somebody really powerful to do that, right? Like, I don't think it's easy to just turn a man's head backwards. Detective Kinderman suspects, I thought this was a wild leap of logic. He suspects that it must be witchcraft.
Okay, but at least he's not asking for a CAT scan.
At least he's thinking outside of the box.
But I'm also partial to him because he's the main character in the third one.
Okay. Because I feel like he is, in my opinion, better in the book. In the movie, I found him very annoying.
It was weird. He's also played by a different actor in the third one. So
Mm-hmm.
this one was just, it was kind of weird to see this interpretation. This movie at this point is really going a direction. It's going a direction.
Okay.
A lot is happening. It's very heavy in the last hour. Everything you think about The Exorcist kind of happens in that last hour.
In the last hour, yes, I agree with that. I guess we'll talk about it like more as we go. But one thing that I like I said, I really like possession movies, demonic possession movies, and they typically all kind of start in the same way. There's always little things that are happening. It's tiny things that make you feel like uneasy, creeped out, and then it kind of exits. Like one movie I really like is The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I love that movie. I thought they did a really good job. I love that actress. I thought she did a really good job as Emily Rose.
Who is that?
It's Jennifer Carpenter. She's also in White Chicks, which I love, and she's also on Dexter. She's Dexter's sister. But I thought she did a really good job. But like in that, it's like there's always a slow build up, so it's always going to be kind of slower, leading to when it's like full blown. I just feel like it's not unique to this movie because a lot of times they try to find a medical reason why things are happening, but I just feel like the medical reasoning in this movie is too outlandish. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like clearly there's no medical explanation for
Because the
this.
bed moving so hard.
There's no medical explanation for that. And I think that's what makes it feel like the beginning of the movie drags. It's because it's so invested in this medical angle when we all
that
know,
you that you might think to yourself like maybe it does become a medical part of the
like,
movie.
right, maybe they do find some medical thing. Well, the name of the movie is The Exorcist.
It happens. It happens so many times. She goes to the doctor she goes to the doctor 3 times.
She goes to the doctor a lot. She spends a lot of time with the doctors. And it's like, but then wait, the craziest thing is the exorcism is only 9 minutes of this movie. Dante, did you realize that?
Yes, I did.
The whole exorcism takes place over 9 minutes. The name of the movie is The Exorcist. The movie really does follow the book very almost religiously. There's small details that they left out that give it like a little bit more context, but the exorcism in the book at least feels longer. I mean, it takes no screen time, and it's like it feels like build up to just it's not enough. And then I'm not trying to exploit this poor little girl, but we don't see enough of Reagan's possession. You know what I mean? We spend a lot of time.
Time with Chris old crazy self.
Right, like we're not even getting the best parts of Reagan's possession, like the desecration and stuff. I want to see her making these clay penises, but we don't. You just it's like you don't see any of that. We don't see her turn Burke Dennings, and that's the same as in the book. It's supposed to leave you wondering. Well, maybe there could be a medical explanation. I don't know if we went into it totally clueless, would we feel differently? Like we're going into it knowing for a fact that she is possessed, so there is no mystery for us. After they do all this hospital stuff, after they do the psychiatrist stuff, in the book, Father Karras spends like weeks doing his own investigation. At that point, I was like, y'all are tripping because she only gets worse. We see that in the movie. She just gets way worse from here on out. Her
And
appearance,
she get ugly.
I wasn't going to say it quite like that. I was just going to say her appearance deteriorates. But let's get back to it. Detective Kinderman is like, it's witches. That's my vote. And So he's like, because it's witches, let me go to Father Karras, because Father Karras wrote a really in-depth paper, I guess that was published at some point, about witchcraft, black mass, and stuff like that. So Detective Kinderman is like, well, this is the closest thing to an expert I'm gonna get. And so I feel like I feel like Father Karras was like, why? How did I get brought into this? He's like, I wrote that paper like a decade ago. I don't know. But he's like, well, I think it's witchcraft because Burke died with a backwards head. Somebody twisted his head like a Coca-Cola top. And these statues are being desecrated. And he's like, I just think that it's too much of a coincidence for them to not be connected. I don't quite understand that leap in logic, but I'll give it to him. So he believes that whoever the perpetrator is some sick person that has a vendetta against the church. And so he is like, well, I think it's a mentally ill priest. And Father Karras, being the psychiatric counselor for the priests in this area and being an expert on witchcraft, apparently, he's like, this is the perfect person to go to. So he knows if anybody would fit the bill for this. And Father Karras gives him nothing. One, because he's like, I don't fucking know. Like, what you're asking me is dumb specific. I don't know anybody that's a witch and also a priest and also mentally ill. But he's like, also at the same time, if I did know, I really couldn't tell you, because he's like, I may be a priest, but I'm also a psychiatrist. Like, it's against patient privilege. But he's like, honestly, I really, really don't know. Can't think of anybody that fits the bill. But that's the first time that we are hearing as the audience that the desecrations and Burke's death must be connected. And so we know that Regan is possessed. And so you slowly, because Chris also slowly starts putting together the thread that maybe it was Regan that killed Burke Dennings. So we cut back to Regan, who's in a psychiatric hospital, and she's gotten a lot worse. And she has cuts and sores all over her body, and she's strapped to a hospital bed because she's uncontrollable. And Chris is sitting with just a gang of fucking doctors, psychiatrists. So they believe that Regan may be suffering from a mental illness that makes her believe that she is possessed, not that she is possessed. So they want to have Regan committed. Chris is like, absolutely not. She is not having it. And they don't say it in the movie. And I don't quite remember in the book what it was either. But Chris doesn't trust doctors. She doesn't like doctors. She doesn't trust them. I think somebody died. I can't quite remember why she doesn't trust them, but she already has a problem with doctors, and the things that they're telling her, they're just not jiving with her. So she's just like, I'm not having her committed. We need to think of something else. And so they don't really know what else to do. So they suggest that Regan have an exorcism performed. They make it pretty clear that Chris, I can't remember how clear they make it in the movie, but Chris is not a religious person. She is an atheist. She does not believe in God. She just is not a part of any organized religion. In the book, Sharon is a spiritual person, and she does believe in God, and Regan doesn't, but I think in the book there had been times, and Chris kind of gets mad at her. Like, it's not just that she doesn't believe in God, she doesn't even want Regan really introduced to that. Sharon tells her stuff, like Regan asks her questions like, why are these things like this or something, and she'll say something like, oh, well, God made them that way. Chris doesn't even like that. So Chris is very much not a religious person. So they're like, well, do you know any priests or anything? We think she should have an exorcism. And so Chris is like, I can't believe I've given you $10,000 for all these tests for you to tell me to go get an exorcism. I mean, she's just like, really irritated with them at this point. But
How
they're
I'm
like,
doing?
I know, but they're like, just hear us out. We think that because she believes that she's possessed, she can be healed by the force of suggestion. If she believes that it's real, she'll believe the exorcism is real, and then she may be cured. So she is kind of at a loss of what to do. When she's bringing Reagan home, she's putting her to bed, and she ends up finding this metal crucifix under Reagan's pillow. And she flips out, okay? So she is trying to figure out where the fuck did this crucifix come from, who put it under the bed. In the book, she is like kind of like a mad woman. She's angry at everybody in the house, yelling. I can't remember how angry she gets in the movie, but she is like,
She's pretty upset. It's pretty totally like she's asking who put it there, who gave it to her.
I guess she's asking this because she's like, the only way that Reagan can believe that she's like possessed is if she has some knowledge that that is even a thing. So she's like, basically, who's teaching her about religion in this house? Because we're not religious in this house. But she's hanging on by a thread, okay, trying to figure out where the fuck this crucifix came from. When Kinderman knocks on her door and he tells Chris, just, he's like, I'm going to be real with you. The only plausible explanation for Burke's death is that he was killed by a powerful man. I don't think he tells her that his head was backwards, but he does tell her that he believes that he was dead before he was pushed from Reagan's window. He's like, it's the only thing that makes sense. Him falling down the stairs wouldn't produce the type of injuries that he had. He's like, the only explanation to me is that he was pushed. And we saw earlier that he finds a little clay figurine on the ground where Burke was found. And Reagan, in addition to making penises for religious statues, Reagan also, I don't know if they show it in the movie, she likes to make stuff with clay. So she makes like little bird figurines and stuff for her mom and stuff. So this is, I don't think that at this point he thinks it's Reagan, but he thinks that it's somebody in this house. So he's like, well, let me, is it possible to ask your daughter what happened? It was her room. Maybe she'd remember. And Chris tells him that Reagan was very heavily sedated that night and that she wouldn't know anything about it. But when Kinderman leaves, you can tell that he is kind of starting to think like, okay, maybe something's fishy about Reagan. In the book, he actually looks up. I think Chris tells him like her window is like always closed anyway. And he's like, can I talk to her right now? And she's like, oh, she's sleeping because she's very, very sick. And in the book, he looks up and he sees like a shadow of Reagan standing in her window. So he's like, oh, okay, like this is weird. He's starting to get some weird suspicions about her. But Chris doesn't really have much time to reflect on what Kinderman tells her because as soon as he leaves, she hears some crazy commotion coming from Reagan's room. So she runs up to the room and things are flying all around. And at this point in the movie, I'm going to start referring to the demon as kind of its own thing instead of saying Reagan is doing these things, because at this point Reagan is kind of gone, right? Like we don't really see Reagan anymore. So it's like Pazuzu, right? So the demon is yelling and it's in its voice at Reagan to he's saying let Jesus fuck you over and over again while he's forcing Reagan to very violently masturbate with that metal crucifix that
Is that even
Chris found.
masturbation?
It's
It's like
supposed
he's
to be.
stabbing
He's
her.
stabbing
It's
her.
like because it looks. Oh man.
It's
Ugh.
very violent. It's extremely bloody. And
Yes, that's
so
why it's not masturbation. Masturbation is fun.
I
You know,
know.
like
So in the book, kinda, it is they do say that she is like masturbating as she does.
climax.
Yes. I don't know, William Peter Blatty was on some other shit when he wrote
he
this
was on
scene.
that. He was on that Stephen King.
Exactly. Exactly. Stephen King's like, oh, that's light work.
I got trains going on these kids.
Exactly. Oh gosh, we're not making that up either, you guys. Read it. It's crazy. But she's violently masturbating, stabbing herself with this metal crucifix, and she's very hurt and she's bleeding a lot. Like it's not just like a little bit of blood, it's some heavy fucking bleeding from her vagina. And Chris rushes over to try to wrestle the crucifix from her to like stop this demon from stabbing her in the vagina. And y'all, Pazuzu, who is a monster, he's diabolical because he takes Chris's face and he shoves it down into Reagan's vagina and he just keeps repeating, lick me. It's barbaric. Chris comes up and she has her daughter's blood all over her face. And then the demon, y'all, he backhand slaps the shit out of Chris so hard. It's like Chris shorted him on her earnings from last night. It's he knocks her blick and block off like she flies across the room.
That she shut the door. The door closed.
The door closed. I know at this point she was like, "Oh shit, I am fucked. This is crazy." But it's so just to give you an idea of how violently Chris flies across the room. This is like, I guess, a behind the scenes fact. Ellen Burstyn, during this scene, the actress that plays Chris, she is pulled back so hard, flies back so hard on her back, she actually broke her back in this scene. Just to give you an idea of when I say she gets her blick and block knocked off, Chris flies across this fucking room.
So we should excuse her for not getting up like baby.
She couldn't get up. In her defense, she really was fucked up. So then Pazuzu is like, he's like, well, I might as well just try to kill this bitch. He slides this is like telekinesis. It's sliding this big ass armoire across the floor to like throw it on her. This huge dresser. So Chris is able to get out of the way, but as she looks at this thing that is supposed to be her daughter, Reagan's head turns completely backwards. Reagan is sitting with her feet hanging off her bed, facing forward, and she is, without moving her body, looking at Chris behind her. And she starts speaking, and I feel like they didn't make it clear enough in the movie. They make it very clear in the book because she does it after this. She does it a lot. She starts talking in Burt Denning's voice, and she turns her head backwards to mock the way that Burt Dennings died with the backwards head. And I think in the book they even say that her features look like Burt Dennings. And so it's like, do you know what she did, your cunting daughter? I just remember Dennings uses cunting a lot. And Chris is appalled at this point. And so Chris is like, I'm not religious, but this is obviously beyond what I am capable of dealing with. So she sets up a meeting with Father Karras, who is a priest and a psychiatrist. So she's like, this is just what I need. And she asks him how he feels about exorcisms and how do you go about getting one of these exorcisms done. And he kind of like laughs it off at first because he's like, that's not really real. You know, the Catholic Church doesn't really do that anymore. And he tells her that he doesn't even know anybody that's ever performed one because they aren't used anymore because they have a better understanding of mental illness and serious psychiatric conditions, and that's most of the time what it is. It's not really it's not really possession. So Chris is like, bro, I just wiped my daughter's vagina blood off my face. She's possessed. Trust me. So Father Karras is trying to really explain away everything, but Chris is at her wit's end. She's headed up to here with the bullshit. And she's like, look, just go see her. Because really, at this point, all you have to do is be in the same room with her to understand that she is obviously very possessed. So at the McNeil house, they go and see Reagan, and she looks atrocious. She is a sweet girl. I am not knocking Linda Blair. I'm giving props to the special effects makeup artist because she looks a shitty mess. She's unrecognizable.
I know
As
she stink.
no, Dante, they make it a point of saying it over and over again in the book. That room is so funky. They look at this, they're like gagging in the book because her not only does her breath stink, I think her breath is like putrid. That's how they describe it. Just think about that. That her breath is nasty as fuck. But she keeps shitting on herself for fun, like because they have to keep cleaning it up. Like she's so musty, shitty, funky, putrid mess. It's so the room is funky. It's very cold. I think it's like the demons producing this very, very, very frigid room, and it stinks in there. And they have to stay in there for such a long period of time. I was like, Reagan wouldn't have been the only one throwing up. So he sees her. She's smelly. It's freezing. She has deep cuts, bruising all over her face. Her lips are super chapped. Shame on Chris for not using the little hospital sponge and dabbing those and stuff.
She's
Her,
already been near her lips enough.
I'm not gonna edit that out either. You fucking monster!
12. I'm like, it's right there.
Such low
I
hanging
need to
fruit.
I need to go to sleep. I need to pull pray or something.
Right, you do before you end up like Reagan. So her hair is a matted mess. She has vomit all over her clothes. She has an oxygen tube in her nose, and she is strapped to her bed, which the demon hates. He hates being strapped. So Father Karras is trying to talk to the demon, and he's being pretty condescending because he doesn't believe that Reagan's really possessed. So the demon hits him with that, Father, could you help an old altar boy that he heard from the beginning, that line from that unhoused guy that Father Karras ran into, which nobody would ever know that. And
No,
Father Karras is kind of shook.
your mother's in here.
Right, so he hits him with that too. He really starts to like dunk on Father Karras because he's like, oh, you don't believe in me? After he said the altar boy thing, I feel like I would have been a little bit more like, how could he possibly? Oh, and he doesn't just say it, he says it in that man's voice. He changes his voice. So I'm like, I don't know. I think I would believe, but the demon, of course, tells Karras that his mother is in there. And Karras is really trying to play it cool by saying, if that's true, you must know my mother's maiden name. What is it? So the demon just looks at him and then just projectile vomits in his face. And it gets all in his mouth and his eyes because I guess he was like, you're not going to play with me. The level of disrespect, it's off the charts from both sides. So it's a very thick green vomit because it's not vomit, it's split pea soup. So after getting cleaned up, Father Karras is still allegedly not convinced that Reagan is possessed. He comes around, I guess, fairly quickly in the movie Dante, in the book, oh my god. Oh my god. He never actually accepts that she's possessed. I mean, it's not until the end, the very end of the actual exorcism, that he's like, okay, well, maybe she is possessed. He never accept. I know Chris must have been frustrated, but she didn't want to like spit in his face because she didn't want to burn her bridge with the church. I know she must have been upset because I was upset. I was like, what the hell is your problem? She speaks in his mother's voice. She speaks in that like unhoused man's voice. She speaks in Denning's voice. They're all unique voices. She talks about things that she shouldn't know at all.
At all. Like, she should know this stuff. Why are y'all so okay with this?
I don't. And he just keeps saying, like, oh, well, that's possible. That's logical. There is an explanation for it. There's not. She's just a 12-year-old girl, a sheltered 12-year-old girl. But he especially doesn't believe that the church is going to approve of an exorcism for Reagan. And he's like, well, one thing is Reagan isn't even speaking in a different language. And that's like possession 101. There's like certain criteria that you have to hit before the church will give you an exorcism. And I guess speaking in a language that you shouldn't know is one of those things. It's like having knowledge that you couldn't possibly have. He is recommending that Reagan go to a hospital. And Chris is like, cut the bullshit right fucking now. Right fucking now. Put your thinking caps on. Okay?
Right the hell no.
She doesn't need a hospital. She needs a fucking exorcism.
They told me to come to y'all.
Right. She does say that.
She's like, the hospital told me to come here, and they told me to go here. What y'all doing?
And so she's like, look me in my face right now and tell me that you think that her problems are all being excused by mental illness, that you believe 100% that an exorcism would not do her any good. And he really can't do that.
Nope.
He can't do it because she pulled that altar boy thing, and she's saying stuff. The demon's like, your mom is in here. He's like, how could he possibly know that my mom is dead? That's another thing. It's just too much. And so he asks Chris too. He's like, did you know that my mom died? And she's like, yeah, Father Dyer told me. And he's like, well, did Reagan know? And she's like, no. Why the fuck
Because
would she know
Reagan
that?
stay out of grown folk business. I'm raising a
Exactly.
good child.
And he's like, well, I can't tell, but okay. So Father Karras comes back at another time to observe some more, but this time he brings a tape recorder with him to start trying to gather some evidence. And it's at this time that we get that really iconic line from the demon, and he walks in with his stuff, and it's like, it's an excellent day for an exorcism. And I think it's actually one of the taglines for the movie. And it's super creepy at this point because Reagan doesn't even look human anymore. She is like totally disfigured. So
I was going to say disgusting.
Okay, just reel it in.
I thought you were going there. I thought you were going there. She was totally disgusting.
I'm trying to be gentle about it. She looks intense, and we'll post pictures on our social
Pazuzu
media.
and Reagan are two different people. So right now, Pazuzu looks awful.
Facts, right? Pazuzu looks disgusting. So the demon, Father Karras, and I think that they do a good job in the book. It's just the kind of stuff that I just kind of wish that they kept in the movie. The demon's conversations with Father Karras, just like with the psychiatrist, they are a lot more in depth. They give a lot more insight, and they make Pazuzu seem very scary, a lot more formidable. He asks him a lot of questions, and the demon says so much. Father Karras asks him stuff in different languages. Like, he asks him something in Latin, and the demon is able to speak perfect Latin. He's able to speak German. At one point, Father Karras is like, have you ever heard the demon speak in a different language? And Sharon says, well, I think I heard the demon speaking Russian before. And then we know the demon speaks in this like gibberish language. But then there's the scene where Father Karras with the tape recorder, he's talking to the demon and everything and asking all these questions. And then in the book, it's like the demon's saying all these things. It's creepy. You know, Father Karras is thinking that he has proof, you know, that the demon is real. But then the demon, this is also the point where he asks him who is inside of Reagan. And I think this is it. And the demon says, I'm the devil. And there's just like a bunch of us in here.
So when he comes in and tells him if he's a devil to prove it with with the opening the door or something.
To do something. He asked him questions. Remember, he was like, well, if my mom's in there, then you'd know her maiden name or stuff like that. And Pazuzu never answers those questions. He never does really what Father Karras asked him to do. But in the book, he explains like, oh, I don't really know how to speak Latin. He's like, you're asking me things and then I'm reading your thoughts and I'm just repeating the answers that you're already thinking of in Latin. Like, I can't really speak these languages. And I was like, first of all, that's crazy in itself, right? Like, but Father Karras feels like telekinesis or like ESP. He's like, that's normal. That's not possession. And I was like, I don't know. That seems like possession to me. But I kept wondering to myself, why isn't Pazuzu doing these things?
And what do you mean?
Like when he asked him, what's my mother's maiden name? Why doesn't Pazuzu tell him? Because he clearly
Because
knows.
Pazuzu said he ain't gotta prove nothing to nobody.
He
He
does.
known in these
Wait, stop.
streets.
Because he does say something like that, right? So I think he asked him to do something like he opens the drawer and I think he asked him to close it. And
He is like, that's a waste of power.
oh, yes, that's what he says. I guess in my mind, I was wondering. This is what I thought. Karras asked him, "What are your intentions with Reagan? Like, how long are you going to stay inside of her?" And Pazuzu's like, "It's fun. I like being inside of her. I'm going to stay inside Reagan until she's dead." He doesn't call her Reagan. He calls her a pig. He's like the piglet, is what he refers to her as. He's, I'm going to stay inside of her until she's dead. And so I have always wondered, do you think that he is not doing these things? Like, do you think that he's not answering certain questions, not pushing the drawer back in, not telling him like his mom's
So
maiden
that he
name?
doesn't get exercised?
Yes! Exactly. Like, does he not want to, like, is he trying to keep it vague so Father Karras can't get the approval to do the exorcism?
Probably.
Probably,
That makes
right?
sense.
They don't
Yeah.
they don't say that anywhere, like in the book or the movie, but I was like, it's not that he can't do these things, right? So it has to be that there has to be a reason he's not. And I think that might be it. I think he doesn't want
Yeah.
the exorcist to happen. So Father Karras, in this too, Father Karras hits the demon with some holy water, to which the demon starts writhing in pain and stuff. He reacts very violently to it and starts speaking in tongues in various different voices. But surprise, surprise, surprise,
Surprise, surprise.
Father Karras reveals to Chris that the water is not, in fact, holy water. It hasn't been blessed. It's just straight tap water. He believes that this is a knock against the case for possession. So Father Karras decides to just take the record that he made of Reagan that night to a linguist to just try to figure out what is she speaking, because everybody keeps calling it gibberish. And so he's like, well, maybe it's some language that I don't know. So let's just see what it is. Because that would be like a vote for the exorcism, because remember, she's supposed to be able to speak in a language she doesn't know. Well, it turns out that the demon is actually speaking in English, but it's perfect backwards English. And then and I was like, damn, Father Karras, you never like tried to play it backwards? Like, as kids, we played fucking records backwards. Like, it just, that never dawned on you. But he finds out that she is speaking backwards. And in my opinion, I think that is almost impossible, right? To speak that well.
Backwards.
Right. In the book, and I guess in the movie too, because he's still not totally convinced, he's like, well, that's possible. It's not a foreign language. Anybody could speak
Shut up.
backwards. That's what I said. I was like, that's so fucking frustrating. But he ends up going home and he ends up listening to the tape playing backwards. And one thing that Pazuzu is saying is fear the priest and Marin. Marin being Father Lancaster Marin, who we met at the beginning of the movie. So this is kind of where we start to, I guess, realize that their fates are intertwined. So I don't know if Father Karras knows who Lancaster Marin is, but as he's analyzing the tapes, he gets an urgent call in the middle of the night from Sharon, Chris's friend / secretary, and she tells him that he needs to come to the McNeil house. Sharon lets him in, and this is without Chris knowing. Chris is asleep because she wants to show him Reagan's stomach, but she doesn't want to upset Chris. So they go into the room, which is freezing and funky, and it's so cold that they can see their breath.
Can't you hear in the when they open the door, it always sounds like someone's like passing gas?
I don't know. I didn't even notice.
So it was like it's like a sound.
I don't know. I'd have to watch it again, but I wouldn't be surprised because in the books,
It's funky.
it's funky. She's almost always like shitting herself just because. Like, Pazuzu was like, this is so fucking fun. He's like, I'm just gonna make her shit herself, shit and vomit. And they're always talking about how Sharon is carrying out nasty, funky ass sheets and stuff. And I was like, put a diaper on that girl. What the fuck? Am I taking crazy pills? But when they go up to Reagan, they open her shirt and they can see the words "help me" are carved into Reagan's stomach. But it doesn't look like they're carved from the outside. It looks like they're being carved from the inside. And it's in Reagan's handwriting. So Father Karras is shook at this point. This is what makes him decide to bring his findings to the church. I think what makes him bring his findings to the church in the book is that Chris, and I think she tells him in this, Chris reveals that Reagan killed Burke Dennings. And it's been like really eating her up. And that's another reason that she doesn't want to take Reagan to a hospital and to be committed, because she's afraid that Reagan's going to be like, well, I killed Burke Dennings. And then they'd be like, gotcha. And like take her to jail, like lock her up permanently. But his superior grants permission on the condition that an experienced priest leads the ritual. And surprise, surprise, the priest that they choose is Father Lancaster Marin. So because Marin had performed an exorcism years earlier, the one that we were talking about, it was in Africa, it was so brutal it almost killed him. But that was against Pazuzu. And so they're like, with this experience, we think he could lead this possession. So I think it's, so there's the sequels and prequels. I think there's like The Beginning, and then Dominion is one of the movies. Pazuzu is actually shown in his first encounter with Father Marin in Africa. So it's in one of those. So there are some concerns about Father Marin's age because he is older, and his health because he does have this heart problem. But they figure he's the most experienced for the job, and that Father Karras will be there, so everything should work out. And Father Marin shows up to the McNeil house. And this is when we get this very iconic shot. I think it's the cover art of the movie. Everybody
Yeah.
knows this shot. He gets to the McNeil house and he takes a moment to kind of stand in front of the house in this lamplight and kind of mentally prepare himself for this fight that he's about to go through. So when he walks in, the demon can sense that Marin is in the house and he calls out to him from the bedroom. He's screaming, Marin. And Father Marin is just really ready to get to work. He's not fucking around. Father Karras is there to assist him, and he establishes some ground rules. He tells Father Karras to avoid too much conversation with the demon, only ask what is relevant. Anything beyond that is dangerous because the demon is a liar and he will try to confuse them. But beyond being a liar, he will also mix some lies with some truth in order to attack them. And that can be pretty dangerous. It can break their resolve because
Deadly.
right. Because remember, Father Karras has also, this whole time, he's been grappling internally because he's lost his faith too, right? And in the book, he actually is a little bit salty that the church wanted, he felt like he was the obvious choice to do the exorcism, but they wanted Lancaster Marin, and he feels kind of like, he wonders like do they know that I've lost my faith, like can they sense it on me? So he's having he's in a vulnerable position because he's struggling internally, and his mom just died. It's just like things, he really was a poor choice for this exorcism, honestly. But Father Marin warns Father Karras that the attacks will be psychological and powerful, and just do not listen. That is the most important thing. Do not listen. So Father Karras keeps trying to give Father Marin some background on the case.
He's like, bitch. Not right now.
I know, he's like, I don't want that. I don't need that. What for? But Father Karras tells Father Marin that Regan has manifested 3 different personalities. And Father Marin's like, look, son, this ain't my first rodeo, okay? He's like, it's just one fucking demon. I'm not gonna tell you again. Leave me alone with the background bullshit and let's just get this show on the road, okay? Because Father Marin's like, there's a point, you see it in the movie when Father Marin gets the message, they send him like a telegraph telling him that he's needed for this exorcism. You kind of see him standing, looking out, he gets it, but you don't get any internal like monologue. In the book, they make it clear that he doesn't even need to read the telegraph because he already had this premonition. He already knows that he is going to have to do this fight with Pazuzu. He's known it since the beginning. So now, once they enter the room, the demon's language is colorful, to say the least. So he is saying things like, stick your cock up her ass. He calls the priests worthless cocksuckers. Father Marin is like, cut the
Got one more
bullshit.
time.
I know. So he just starts throwing holy water on him and he just starts praying. He's getting to work. The demon is going through it. And this is when he spits out another very memorable line to Father Karras, who I guess he can sense is the weak one in this situation. But he tells him that his mother sucks cocks in hell, which is so diabolical. He also calls
Right.
him faithless slime. And as they're praying, Reagan's bed starts to levitate, and we start to get some blinking shots of the demons like Pazuzu showing through. Reagan then sits up and does another like 360 head spin. The demon also tries to frazzle Father Karras by telling him that it's his fault that his mother died alone, which is already something that he feels very guilty about. And at one
That's
point,
very mean.
it was very mean, but he can sense that Father Karras is the weak one. He's hoping that he'll just kind of bow out, right? So Reagan's restraints are broken, and she starts to levitate, straight float above the bed. Her eyes are rolled back, they're totally white. The entire house starts shaking at this point. The ceiling's cracking, the priests are getting thrown all around. So when Father Karras goes to retie Reagan's hands and feet, she just cracks him over the head. So they're just really going through it. These priests are getting a run for their money. So then we get this shot where we see the demon struggling. So it's a kind of almost like it's a dim shot. It's like foggy. The Reagan is on the bed, just like really struggling, like holding out. Her arms are outstretched, and we see this image of the beastly statue that Father Merrin had encountered at the beginning of the movie. It is a really great shot. Um, this is one of those scenes where it kind of also reinforces who the demon is that has possessed Reagan. So that's why I don't really understand why people believe that the devil has possessed her. I feel like the movie's not totally clear, but I feel like it's clear enough. But then the demon settles down for a minute, and Father Merrin is putting in work. He is really working hard, but you could tell that it's affecting him. Father Karras, who is a younger priest, he is also very tired. So they decide to take a break before starting up again. And Father Merrin goes to the bathroom to take some nitroglycerin pills for his heart. And while he's doing that, Father Karras re enters the room with Reagan, and she appears to him as his mother. As he's wiping her forehead, the demon starts to speak in Father Karras's mother's voice, and she's saying the things that she'd said to him before when she was in the hospital, like, "I'm afraid, Dimmy. Why you do this to me, Dimmy?" Um, in the book, there is a lot more conversation because the exorcism is a lot longer in the book. I think it takes place over days in the book. In the book, Burke Dennings, his mom, they say things like, "Please don't kick me out of this body." Dennings says stuff like, "Real estate is so expensive and hard to find right now. Like, please don't kick me out." I think the demon's like, "I don't want to be sent to the abyss." His mom is like, "Please, I don't have anywhere to go. Don't make me go." So they're really trying to play on his guilt to try to get him to like let him stay in Reagan's body. But Father Karras denies that it's his mother, but it is breaking him. He's just way too affected. So when Father Merrin comes back into the room, he tells Father Karras to leave the room for a while. So in the book, just a couple of things I forgot to mention. So when Merrin first arrives and the demon calls out to him, Merrin immediately goes to Reagan's room and they stare at each other for a moment. And the demon just says to Merrin, "This time you're going to lose." And that kind of affects him. And so he's kind of going into it thinking that. And remember, he is sick and he really shouldn't have taken on
Just
this
roll.
exorcism in the first place. Right.
But they be calling you. You know how they call you.
I know. I mean, they did call him. He should have said, I mean, he should have been like, "You know what? I almost died last time," but he didn't. I think Pazuzu brings up later to Father Karras that they're gonna lose because of Marin's pride. That Marin is too proud and he shouldn't have taken on this role. So I think that it is like a combination of a few things. Additionally, in the book, Marin and Karis have a conversation while they're taking a break from the exorcism. And it's here that Marin tells Karis that he's fought this same demon before, and it's very powerful. And Father Karras asks him, what's the point? Like, why does, if like the girl doesn't feel these things, you know, like he has possession of her body, why do it? You know, she's not aware. And Father Marin tells Father Karras, and this is actually a scene that they cut from the movie, but they put it in at a later date for the, I guess, like uncut version. There's like a director's cut of the movie, but Marin just essentially tells him that the purpose of the demon is not to hurt the person that is being possessed, but to torment and break the will of everyone around that person.
Around.
Right. And to make that person kind of be like, why God? You know, like what God would do this. And so that's the movie put it back in there later. William Peter Blatty thought that it was a really important scene. The director didn't think it was that important, but it is in the director's cut. So, right. So, Marin then continues the exorcism by himself. Downstairs, Karis is trying to assure Chris that Reagan will not die. And after he kind of composes himself, he goes back up to the room to help. He's really only gone a matter of minutes, but when he gets back, he finds Marin dead,
Dead.
very dead from a heart attack. And the demon's just sitting on the bed looking at him. So then Father Karras comes to he's runs to the body, and the demon just starts laughing. And this is too much for Father Karras. He's at his wit's end. And so he grabs the demon and he really starts beating the shit out of him,
Like
right?
2 pieces in a biscuit.
Exactly. So it's super silly to me the way he starts beating him. In the book, Karras really taunts the demon because in the movie, after he's done giving him the 2 piece in the biscuit, he just starts demanding, he's like, take me instead. Take me. As they're rolling on the floor fighting. And the demon rips off Father Karras' St. Joseph medallion from his neck, and he ends up possessing him, which you can see as a change in Father Karras' appearance. After he possesses him, it's Reagan is freed. And I always thought that was a little weird because I'm I guess in my head, I'm that was too
Too easy?
easy, right? I just couldn't. I don't think that Pazuzu would do that. Just be okay. In the book, Karras really taunts him, and he just starts calling him a loser. He's like, wow, what a loser, you fucking dirtbag. He's like, you're not that strong. You're only strong because it's a 12-year-old little girl. And he just really goads him.
Oh,
Yes. And so,
like the end, you remember in It Too, when it's just the power of persuasion kills it. If you're not scared of him
right.
anymore, or even in Freddy 1, when she's like, I'm not afraid of you anymore.
And he's like, well, my broken ribs say tell me differently. No, that's exactly what it's like. And I thought that it was so much better done in the book because you could see that, right? How that would piss Pazuzu off so much that he would possess him to hurt him, right? Because he's like, oh, I'm a fucking loser. Look how strong I am. And jumping. I just thought that just made a little bit more sense to me that he would get so upset about, because the demon does at times snap. He does kind of have a short fuse. So to just be called weak and stuff like that, I was like, that is a better scene to me, to make him jump out of Reagan, because I just don't think that this ass whooping would make him jump out of her. I don't even think Pazuzu can feel. Either way, Pazuzu does leave Reagan's body. So he jumps into Karis, and Karis is now possessed, but he musters the last bit of strength that he has left, and he sacrifices himself, and he throws himself out of the window because he knows that Pazuzu is going to stay in the host until the host is dead. So if he dies, he knows that Pazuzu will be gone. Throws himself out of the same window that Burke Dennings fell out of, and he tumbles down these 76 steep, hard-as stone stairs outside. It's a really, really nasty fall. So all of this is happening, and Detective Kinderman has also showed up to Chris's house at this point, presumably to ask more questions about Burke's death. But hearing all this commotion, Chris and Kinderman run up to Reagan's room, where they find a dead Marin on the floor, and through the window, they see a dying Karis at the bottom of the stairs, exactly like where Burke was found. And Reagan is at this point freed, and she's in the corner, balled up, crying, very confused because she doesn't really remember anything that's happened to her up until this point. And so she's crying for her mom, and Kinderman is very shook by this entire scene. In the book, they make it more clear through more conversations with Father Karras. Detective Kinderman is pretty aware that Reagan is possessed. He is unsure of how to handle that information. He's unsure how to feel about it, how it should affect his investigation. In the book, Karras tells him to just kind of like put it in the hands of a higher power type thing. But in this moment, Kinderman seeing this scene, I guess, can kind of piece together what's happened here. But Chris just embraces a now healed Reagan, and outside onlookers start to gather around Father Karras.
They're just dying on the street out there.
I know. It's very sad, but
Because you would have thought that fall would have killed him.
yeah, no, he doesn't die immediately. So he is laying there, and he is very hurt, dying. During all of this commotion, Father Dyer runs up to dying Father Karras, and it's such a touching scene in the book, but you can't see Karras's face in the movie. But in the book, Dyer sees on Karras's face, he's laying there and he is dying, but he has the look of triumph and a look of peace on his face. And he can't talk or anything because he is really fucked up. And you kind of see this in the movie. He's grabbing onto Dyer's arm, and that's how he's like kind of communicating with him. And Father Dyer asks Father Karras, because he knows he's going to die, he's like, do you want to confess your sins? And Father Dyer squeezes his arm to confess his sins before dying, and then Father Dyer administers his last rites, and Karras dies with a look of joy on his face. It's super touching in the book, and a lot more powerful, I think.
In the book.
Yeah. But even in the movie, it is a pretty heart-wrenching scene because Father Dyer is very upset by Father Karras's death. I thought it would have been better if you could have seen Father Karras's face. We could have connected more in the movie, but the night is over. Father Karras has died, and it's sometime later, but the movie isn't great with time. But Chris and Reagan are packing up, and they're preparing to leave Georgetown to head back to LA.
This was a rental, of course.
And I think they're pretty done here. So Sharon, who has decided to not go with them
ever again,
right? She gives Chris Father Karras's. I keep saying a Saint Joseph medallion, but I think it's Saint Christopher because they say it in the book. she gives Chris Father Karras' St. Christopher medallion that she found on the floor in Reagan's room. And on their way out, Father Dyer comes to say his goodbyes. And in the book, they said that he'd come around a few times because he really, really wants to know what happened, because Father Karras was his friend. He really wants Reagan to remember, but every time he comes around, Chris is like, she just really has no memory of the entire ordeal. And he's like, I mean, that's okay. He kind of accepts it. And so then Reagan comes out, they're getting ready to leave, and she sees Father Dyer's clerical collar. And without knowing why, she's kind of moved by it. And she gives Father Dyer a kiss on the cheek before leaving. As they're driving away, Chris gives Father Dyer's Karras' St. Christopher medallion as a keepsake. And then Father Dyer walks over, briefly examines the steps where Karras died before turning to walk away. And then we get the end credits. And that is the end of the movie.
The way it ends is weird, in my opinion.
Which part?
Just that very ending. That ending was giving me real romantic comedy.
The her leaving, giving him the medallion, that part.
And then him looking at the stairs, reminiscing, and then end credits.
It does feel that way. I do have to point out, I know I've referenced it a lot, that is not the way it ends in the book.
I can't wait to read the book.
I'm worried about you reading the book because there's a couple places where it's a little slow. And I don't want you to be like, this bitch recommended this bullshit.
I wouldn't do that. I'm always excited about books.
But yes. So but with that being said, it doesn't have that ending in the book.
Is
it's
the
actually
ending more satisfying?
The ending is very similar. They do have this exchange, Chris and Father Dyer. It's not so immediate after the exorcism. There's a couple of times leading up that I think Father Dyer talks to her a couple of times leading up to them leaving. Then they're leaving, and I don't think the medallion is not in it at all. I think Father Dyer...
Very rom-com. Let's add jewelry to it.
Well, that's the thing. I can't... So the Reagan or Pazuzu doesn't rip the medallion off of his neck. It's not in her room. They don't find it. That whole part is not in there. I think that Father Dyer might give Chris the medallion when she's leaving, just as a keep the faith type thing. I think that happens. But the ending is Father Dyer and Kinderman shows up, and he's like, oh, you just missed him. And he's like, oh, I wanted to say goodbye, And so then they end up talking, and he's just like, what do you think really happened? And he's like, I don't know. And then they kind of... It's still low-key romantic comedy. Because he's like... I like it, okay? Because Casablanca is one of my favorite movies. I don't know if
you really are 107.
Okay, it's a classic. It has an ending that I love. There's an ending where, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Rick, who is played by Humphrey Bogart, they're walking away. It's Rick and Captain Louis, and they're like, well, we kind of need to get out of Casablanca now because we kind of burned our bridge here. And so he's like, well, of course I'm going to go with you. And he says, Louis, I think that this is the start of a beautiful friendship. And they kind of walk off into the sunset. That's how this kind of ends. But it's Kinderman and Dyer. He actually says the line, like the old Casablanca, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And it's like, ha ha ha. Just read it. Shit. I don't have to explain myself to you.
I didn't say anything.
It's the look on your face. Just fucking read it.
That the
I thought it was cute.
it's a scary movie.
Whatever. She's healed now. We might as well have fun.
She took a bath.
Ugh. I know they have to be happy. Their laundry bill was probably skyrocketing. They probably took out stock in Calgon.
They did not get their deposit back.
No, they were like, this room smells like shit. No, and this window's been broken several times. Absolutely not.
And 2 people have died.
Well, in addition to that, so let's be clear on that. They're like, people died here. So, Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 78% critic and an 87% audience.
That's weird to you, huh? You thought it'd be higher, critic-wise.
It is weird to me because I think, even if I'm not mistaken, isn't A Nightmare on Elm Street higher? The remake? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
95
a
and 84.
95% critic rating. I'm shook.
That's an A.
That's an A+. I'm shook. Yeah. I don't know. I am surprised just because this movie is considered such a classic.
Right, I thought it'd been 100%.
I know.
Or at least in the 90s.
I thought it would have been in the 90s for sure. I'm surprised, but it's like for instance, I think this movie is very good. I think it has great cinematography. I think it follows the book very closely. I think it's very well done overall. This movie does have some faults. I think it has some issues with pacing.
Is it almost too true to the source material?
It's almost too true to the source material, and it's better in book form.
Most things are, but I feel like in 378 pages, this would have been much more palatable than that first hour.
I agree.
Reagan getting a bath, Reagan going to the doctor 3 times. I thought it wasn't John Q.
It doesn't stop. That's awful. That's so stupid. This is the thing, though. But you're right. It feels like a lot of time in the movie when she's in the hospital. It feels like a lot of time at the doctor's office. It feels like a lot of times of them saying some crazy ass shit. And I think in the book, it's better paced because I think in the book, it's like you have a little bit, then you have more possession stuff, then a little bit more possession stuff. It's like it's getting progressively worse, and we're getting a little bit more, not action, but it's a little less just like us sitting at a doctor's office for an hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I always find the B plot more interesting. Everything that's going on with the father. I enjoy that more in this movie.
I like Father Karras. In the book, I felt like no shade to the actor that played Father Karras because I think that he did a really good job. I just think that I wanted to feel for him more. You really feel the father in the book is very tragic. I don't know. It's like, I guess you just get a lot more of his inner dialogue. You get a lot more scenes with just him. You get a lot more indication of just how dead tired he is, how sad, confused, frustrated, like kind of grieving his mom, losing his faith. You get a lot more of that. And they don't really have time to do that in the movie because they're doing brain scans and stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, she goes to the doctor a lot.
She goes to the doctor a lot.
A lot.
And not saying that the book is not without its faults either, because I feel like William Peter Blatty could have sped it up a little bit with Father Karras, like kind of coming around to the possession part. Because I felt like some stuff I was like, damn, this is dragging. Clearly this girl is possessed. And like,
We know what's up.
we know she's possessed. So, and then in the movie, like, it can't be understated that the entire exorcism scene from start to end only lasts 9 minutes. And I really like, one of the biggest things that I like in possession movies is the battle between good and evil, right? Like there's a priest that's going to go in, and that is supposed to be like, they also make Lancaster Marin a bit more formidable in the book. He still dies, but it's over. Like the exorcism lasts, I think, like a couple of days before he dies, and they're gearing up for it. They're like, it could last days or weeks. They're like, we don't know how long it's going to last. And this is like one night. They win because Father Karras sacrifices himself, but the battle is so, in my opinion, lackluster. I want to see this really powerful exchange between like pure evil and pure good. Like that's, in my opinion, what makes really good exorcism movies. And The Exorcist really, like, low key falls flat in that regard.
Do you think that possibly that's like, I don't know, we both seen it, in the new one, The Exorcist is pretty long. It's about 25-30 minutes of the movie, right?
All right.
I guess I bring that up because I know that movie is kind of polar for people,
All right.
but when you're telling me about this in the book, I'm like, I wonder if they took that from the book. They took those pointers from the book and kind of expanded on the exorcism itself because of the source material.
I have to believe, because knowing what we know about David Gordon Green, and he's just him, and I think Danny McBride helped write this movie too. I think that I think they're like us. I think they're really big fans of just horror, the genre. I think they like movies. I'm sure they read books too. I'm sure that they've read The Exorcist. I'm sure they read Stephen King, So I'm sure that he was inspired by probably this and other stuff, A lot of people don't like it, but I liked the combination of different faiths, different people coming together, because it's like, they, in this book and movie, they just like mention it. I know that it's in like the prequels, but Father Merrin almost dies fighting this demon. Like, I want to see the battle,
I see what you're saying.
Let's get to the fun facts. The total deaths in the movie are 4. So Karras' mom, natural causes. Burke Dennings, head twisted like a bottle top. Father Merrin, heart attack. Father Karras sacrifices himself. So it was the first horror film to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. It didn't win, but still.
What one?
The Godfather. So, but it was nominated. And then, of course, Linda Blair was nominated.
Was Chrissy McNeil nominated?
No, I don't think so. So in 2010, the Library of Congress selected this film for preservation in the National Film Registry, and they stated it as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So parts of William Peter Blatty's novel were inspired. It's a 1949 exorcism performed by a Jesuit priest named William S. Bowdern. So I actually listened to a podcast on The Exorcist. It's called Inside the Exorcist, and it's like a mini, I think it's like 6 or 7 episodes. It was very good. I got a lot of behind the scenes stuff from that, but it was so fucking audacious. So there's the exorcism of Roland Doe. So in the late 1940s, they performed a series of exorcisms on. It's an anonymous boy, so he was he was always documented under the pseudonym Roland Doe, and he was 14, and he was alleged to be the victim of demonic possession. And the events were recorded by the attending priest. So there was Raymond J. Bishop, and subsequent supernatural claims surrounding the event were used as elements in William Peter Blatty's novel, The Exorcist. So that boy, there are people that believed that they tracked him down. And on that fucking podcast, Dante, they fucking call the man that they thought was this boy.
On the phone?
Yes. And he's like, don't ever fucking call me again. I was like, that's wild. So people have thought that they've tracked him down, and people have tried to contact him. Obviously, he does not want to be contacted. Obviously, he's trying to be anonymous for a reason, but apparently this boy was actually possessed. And so that inspired, I think William Peter Blatty was like in college at the time when he read about this boy. And that's where he got a lot of aspects from the novel. So a lot of things that happened to Reagan really happened to this boy. There was an actress named Mercedes McCambridge, and I heard a lot about her on this podcast as well. So Pazuzu's voice obviously is not Linda Blair, right? It's this actress, Mercedes McCambridge, and she provided the voice of Pazuzu in the most demonic forms. And to do this, she was a voice actress who she really went to extremes, and she insisted on swallowing raw eggs. She was chain smoking to alter her voice. She was an alcoholic in the past. She suffered with alcohol abuse in the past. But she wanted to drink whiskey while she was recording because she felt like it distorted her voice even more. Like she really gave it her all for this vocal work for this movie. She also because she was giving up her sobriety, she had like a priest with her during the recordings. She also wanted to be bound to a chair, like arms and legs, like wrists and feet bound to a chair to give it a more realistic sound when the demon was struggling, because Reagan spends a large part of the movie in restraints as well. And she later called it very horrific. And the director of the movie actually said that the things that she did and the extent that she pushed herself, he thought that it was really like authentic, but it was also very terrifying. And she said, allegedly, she said, I'll do all of this, but I don't want to be credited in the movie. She said she didn't want it. She wanted people to believe that the voice was Reagan's. And people did. After the movie was released, though, she changed her mind, and she really wanted
She wanted that money.
She did. She wanted to be given credit, and she started bad-mouthing the movie, the director. I think she sued them. It was a huge deal. She ended up it's like they didn't give her credit, so I think she got the Screen Actors Guild involved, and there was arbitration, and so her name was included in the credits on all but like the first 30 prints of the movie. And the dispute prevented the release of a soundtrack album, because that would have had like excerpts of dialogue from the movie. Like, it was a huge deal. But then
Mess.
Right, it was a really big mess. But once it was all revealed that the voice was not actually Linda Blair, which I feel is exceedingly obvious, right?
Because she's 12.
Right. But once it was revealed that it wasn't actually Linda Blair, people actually called for her nomination to be pulled, because they didn't think that she deserved an Academy Award anymore, because they were like, well, what did you really do?
Wow.
And then think about it, she's 12. She's a
She's
12-year-old
12.
girl.
And she didn't win.
And she didn't win. People didn't, but a lot of people believe that she didn't win because of all the controversy. Because the Academy decided, they were like, well, we're not going to pull her nomination because she's already been nominated. It's not fair. But at that point, she didn't win.
Wow.
Right. So let's just run through these last few. So crazy fact. So Paul Bateson. So he's in the movie. He performs the arteriogram on Reagan. After he was in the movie for doing that, he murdered some people, and then he went to he was a murder. He went to prison. So yeah, that was really crazy.
That's really crazy. I didn't think that was coming up.
Yeah, in 1979, Basin was convicted of the murder of film industry journalist Addison Verrill and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. In 2003, he was released on parole, which ended after 5 years. Prior to Bateson's trial, police and prosecutors implicated him in a series of unsolved slayings of gay men in Manhattan known as the Bag Murders, killings he had reportedly boasted about while in jail, with prosecutors bringing it up at his sentencing. However, no additional charges were ever brought against him. So yeah, he was a
That's
murderer.
freaking nuts.
I know. And yeah, that's all the facts that I have. This has been a long
So,
ass
what do you think?
recording. Yes, so I guess it's time to give it a hit or miss. You go first, hit or miss.
I mean, it's a hit. Yeah, check it out.
I agree. I think it's a hit. I think I know that I probably made that clear. Despite all of the bitching that I've done about it up until this point, I think that the movie is definitely a hit. I think it's a classic, and I think that you should see it just because it's so clear that this movie, whether you know it or not, has definitely shaped the way that we think about things in the horror sphere, you know what I mean? Like, it's shaped the way that we feel about Ouija boards, about possession. It's like, so it's permeated popular culture so much. It's been featured in so much that whether you've seen it or not, you're like aware of
This
things.
stuff.
Right. So I definitely think that it's worth seeing.
Definitely.
So, do you want to tell people about the socials?
Yes. So, remember, please, first off, like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. One, did you get that on
Did you get that on
film?
film?
Follow us on Instagram. Did you get that on film?
We also have a Facebook.
We have a Facebook.
Did you
Did
get
you
that
get
on
it on
film?
film?
So yeah,
That is it. This was a long one.
it was a long one. It's going to be long. I promise I'm going to do my best to edit it down. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next Tuesday for a brand new episode.
All right.
Bye.